My name is Jillian Negron, and I will be your moderator for this evening. At this moment, I would like to thank our Honorable Mayor Jerry Demings, Orange County Sheriff's Office, Stand Up Survivor, Community Legal Services, Harbor House, and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for your support in making this event possible. As I mentioned, my name is Jillian Negron. I'm the Senior Planning and Development Assistant at Orange County Housing and Community Development Division. I'm also a certified domestic violence advocate, and I also lead the Fair Housing Project initiatives here in the county. I oversee the CDBG and Emergency Solutions Grant. The objective of this presentation is to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the domestic violence community. We're also going to be addressing some of the housing rights of domestic violence survivors, what are the available legal services for survivors in Orange County, and law enforcement engagement within domestic violence. Before we begin our next session, I want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat box and we will address everyone's questions towards the end. And if anything happens with the audio, please let us know through the chat box. Thank you. As we know, the Orange County Domestic Violence Commission is an initiative that's spearheaded by community leaders. It was convened in 2005 by former Circuit Court Chief Judge Belvin Perry and late Honorable Lydia Gadner, Clerk of Courts of Orange County. Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings reconvened the commission in 2019 in response to an increase in cases and incidents of domestic violence in the county. The commission is comprised of the judiciary, countywide law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, public defenders, nonprofit and faith-based organizations, academia, private sector, and survivors. Currently, the chair of the commission is held by Honorable Alice Blackwell of the Circuit Judge 9 Judicial Circuit Court, and the co-chair of the commission is Mr. Dick Batchelor, President of Dick Batchelor Management and Group. The commission has different committees. We have the Court Process Committee, the Systems Process Committee, Community Services and Resources Committee, and the Public Awareness and Community Education Committee. Each committee is in charge of identifying what the current needs of the community are and putting together policies and procedures and other alternatives to assist survivors of domestic violence. The Domestic Violence Commission has 17 offices, agencies, and organizations that represent the commission. It's composed of 23 commission members. As of today, we've had 27 meetings. 30 community partners are engaged in the DVC work, and 70 plus work hours of commission and committee work has been established. Thank you very much to all of our volunteers and community partners. Throughout this past year, a lot of the committees, one of their goals has been to get together and establish a list of recommendations based on studies and focus groups that they've been conducting in the community. And some of the preliminary recommendations are to enhance domestic violence related trainings for courts and law enforcement and service providers, increase public awareness on the signs and types of domestic abuse, and building a resource directory for victims and survivors to navigate services. If there are any questions that the community at large has, we recommend for you all to check out our latest update in the upcoming meetings and some of our information in our website at www.ocfl.net//DVC. And at this moment, I want to welcome the Chief Executive Officer of Stand Up Survivor, Lisa Alexander, who's going to be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the domestic violence community. Ms. Lisa Alexander is the founder and executive director of Stand Up Survivor, a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was founded in 2015. Lisa has a bachelor in psychology and a master's degree in counseling psychology. She's a doctoral candidate in the Behavioral Health Leadership Program. Lisa is also a domestic violence advocate and a survivor. She holds a seat on the mayor's DV Commission in Orange County. Welcome, Lisa. If you can please turn your camera on and wave to everyone. And there you go. Welcome, Lisa, and the presentation is all yours.
Thank you very much, Yesenia. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Lisa Alexander, and I am excited to be with you today. As a survivor and founder of a domestic violence organization, I'm excited to share with you first a little bit about what we do here at Stand Up Survivor. Our mission is to educate, empower, and equip survivors of domestic violence and the community. We truly believe that people are educated about domestic violence, they are empowered to change it. Some of the programs that we have are domestic violence empowerment coaching programs. We assist with safety planning and lethality assessments. We provide survivors relocation assistance. We also have a donation center where we provide food, clothing, and hygiene products to survivors of domestic violence. Our Great Freedom Bag programs, where we provide emergency needs for survivors with 2 weeks worth of items if they have to leave in an emergency situation. We assist with financial assistance for them as well. One of our new programs is a No Survivor Left Behind, where we focus on our male survivors of domestic violence and the LGBTQ+ community. On a weekly basis, we provide video podcasts, and it's called A Deeper Look into Domestic Violence, where we have different experts in the field of any area that really touches domestic violence come in and talk about how it impacts domestic violence and seriously bring awareness and education to those who are experiencing it and to those whose lives are touched by it. Through our global platform, we reach on a monthly basis 1.7 million people. And as you can see kind of on the map where the people that we reach and educate and impact with our message goes on domestic violence education and awareness. So for those that are listening that do not know, the definition of domestic violence is the willful intimidation, which can include physical assault, battery, sexual assault, or any type of other abusive behavior as a systematic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one intimate partner against another. And it can include physical threats, sexual violence, emotional and psychological abuse as well. And it's important to understand that the frequency and severity of domestic violence varies dramatically. So I'm going to share a few statistics with you. If you do not already know them, it's important to recognize that domestic violence, which is also known as domestic abuse or intimate partner violence, affects 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, and 1 in 3 teens have or will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. Those numbers are huge, okay? And so it's important to recognize that girls and young women between the ages of 16 and 24 experience the highest rate of intimate partner violence. And that's why it's so important for us to impact our youth and young adults with the education of domestic violence. Nearly 43% of dating college women report having experienced violent and abusive dating behaviors. But the common trend that was found among that age group is that they were totally unaware of what domestic abuse is and what they can do about it, and even the red flags associated with it. So if you just look on the screen here, you will see that this is a public health crisis. Those numbers are extremely high, and it's very clear that it is. And it's important to acknowledge and recognize that domestic violence is not about love. It is only about power and control over one person over another person. All races, cultures, and genders, sexual orientations, and ethnic statuses, even religious preferences, are impacted by intimate partner violence. On the screen today, you will see the power and control wheel. Now, yes, sometimes it's cyclical, but other times it's not. And so these are some of the key points with domestic violence. It is important that I'm going to note that violence is disproportionate in the communities of color and other marginalized groups. So I'm going to get down into COVID-19 and domestic violence. So remember that I said that domestic violence is already a public health crisis. So now on top of that, we have a public health crisis that is affecting everyone in the entire world. And so here is some of the information I wanted to share with you. The United Nations reported that in France, domestic violence report has increased 30% as of March 2020. They also reported that the helpline calls increased as well. So again, this is affecting the entire world. So in China's Hebei province, we see that domestic violence tripled from February 2019 to February 2020, tripled. In the UK, domestic abuse killings more than doubled amid the COVID-19 lockdown. And so this is a pandemic inside of a pandemic. And there really is no way to minimize the impact domestic violence has. And then on top of that, with COVID-19. The New England Journal of Medicine indicated that there was a 50% drop in numbers calls to the hotline in some regions. So as you can see, it really can fluctuate, that some places have found an increase and some have found a decrease. And one thing about research, it takes a lot of time to get all those numbers in and together. So you are going to recognize that as time goes on, more numbers are going to continue to come in. So here's some Orange County data. In 2019, 8,168 domestic violence offenses were reported, and that included a manslaughter and 13 murders. In 2020, the stats are still currently pending, as I shared a second ago. But some of the preliminary data that has come through from one of our partners here in Orange County, the Victim Services Center, is that more than half of domestic violence cases include sexual violence. And during COVID-19, there has been an increase in that number. So in March of 2019, 57% were known to their perpetrators. But in March of 2020, 81% of those were known to their partners. This just shows an increase, a significant increase in numbers. So I'm going to touch on really quickly some of the domestic violence trends that are happening due to COVID-19. We know the CDC recommended that quarantine, self-isolation, and social distancing was critical to stop the spread of COVID-19. And we saw that that was effective. But it's also important to recognize that this can be and has been catastrophic and detrimental to survivors and victims that are experiencing domestic violence. See, one of the tools that abusers use is isolation. And so now there's forced isolation within the home. So social distancing for those that are experiencing domestic violence is now equal to isolation, forced isolation for survivors of domestic violence, which can increase mental health issues such as PTSD, anxiety, depression, substance use. And at a point, schools were a safe place, but for months, school was not in session, and a place where kids that were experiencing domestic violence in their home had a place where mandated reporters were. That has significantly changed. Judicial systems where the court times have changed, the hours where you can easily walk into a courtroom at any time, that has changed to file an injunction. It was easily accessible before, but during COVID-19 and post-COVID-19, everything has changed. So the whole process moving forward has changed. Let's talk a little bit about the loss of employment. Living in Central Florida, we are the hub for tourism, and we know Universal Studios, Disney, some of the biggest places that employ a lot of people in this county have had to let a lot of workers go. And we already know that financial abuse exists in the home, but we also know that stressors can increase where domestic violence already was, it increases it. And so with the loss of income coming in, it will increase the stress within the home, which equals additional domestic violence. Technological abuse is a big one with domestic violence because before COVID-19, they were putting trackers on cars and checking phones and emails and putting trackers and information finders on computers. And that has increased even more now. Cameras in the home, tracking systems, and that has increased. Abusers have continued to do that. One of the really, really big ones that we have found with the survivors that we're working with and all the way around is reduced access to healthcare services. Now, doctors are doing virtual appointments. So before, when you were able to go into the doctor's office, they were able to do a domestic violence screening. It has turned virtual now. So it is very difficult for a victim of abuse sitting next to their abuser to do a domestic violence screening with them in the room. So the chances of them actually being able to divulge what is occurring in their home, that has decreased. So now virtual appointments have become more of the norm. And of course, you have the fear of going into the emergency room because of COVID, and they said only come for emergency situations. And so in order to not catch COVID, of course, you're going to stay home, which can increase the likelihood of further domestic violence and injuries for victims. So we know that domestic violence, and if you didn't know, this is a really, really important point, that domestic violence is a primary cause of homelessness for survivors and their families. Oftentimes they stay in the home because of a lack of another place to go. So there was already an affordable housing crisis here, but I'm telling you that has increased since COVID-19. It has intensified housing instability. See, when someone has stable housing, it creates a stable mental health environment, physical environment, overall health for someone who has stable housing. And of course, to prevent the transmission of COVID-19, shelters, which you'll hear about a little bit later from Harbor House, but also hotels have had to reduce their capacity of how many people they're allowed to have. And so, of course, survivors and victims who may have desired to go into a shelter, that has decreased because it's safer, they think, to stay home with the violence that it is to go into a shelter. We've even had survivors who had desired to leave their home, but necessarily couldn't because family members weren't willing to take them in because, again, they were told to self-isolate. So when they previously may have had a place to go, they are unable to go there anymore. Now, we already know that evictions are a big problem, especially now since COVID, people weren't able to pay their rent, and evictions are able to be reinforced now. And if a survivor of domestic violence is leaving their abusive relationship, they may be unable to find another safe place to go because of the eviction that is on their record. Landlords and complexes do not desire to rent to someone who has an eviction. And the thing about that, for victims of domestic violence, they may not know their rights. And that's what's so important about this webinar. So I love the fact that we've collaborated with different partnerships here in Orange County that will be able to give you more information on that. It's important to recognize that a lack of alternative housing often leads to survivors to staying or returning to an abusive relationship. Oftentimes survivors stay because they know what's going to happen in their home versus leaving and unsure what's going to happen outside of the home. Mm-hmm. So with community partnerships here, we're able to understand what their legal rights are. Thank you very much.
Lisa, thank you very much for your presentation. It was very informative. Like you mentioned, our community partnerships are very essential to the work that we do. And right now we have a strong partnership with Community Legal Services up in Florida, attorney Jeff Hussey. He is a director of public interest and litigation. Jeff, how are you today? Go ahead and wave.
Good. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. As Yesenia said, I'm the Director of Litigation at Community Legal Services in Mid-Florida. We are a nonprofit legal aid organization that provides free legal services to those who qualify in Orange County and to other surrounding Central Florida counties. I'm going to focus a little bit on housing rights, both under the Fair Housing Act and VAWA. This is going to be a brief presentation and by no means an exhaustive look at how Fair Housing Act can protect victims of domestic violence or how VAWA can protect victims, but I want to make sure everybody knows what their rights are and the protections they do have under both federal acts. The Fair Housing Act, first I'll go over first, is a part of the Civil Rights Act that was initially signed into law in 1968. It came into existence after the assassination of Dr. King as a way to try and stabilize the country from the racial unrest that was undergoing. The act makes it illegal to discriminate against people on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, familial status, disability, or national origin in the housing and rental market. Now, Orange County does have additional protections as well as to gender identity, sexual identity, and as well as age. While a person survivor of domestic violence is not a protected class, there are ways to use the Fair Housing Act to successfully bring cases against housing providers who may have denied a person housing based on their status as a survivor. There are basically two types of discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. One is intentional discrimination. The other is a theory called desperate impact. Intentional discrimination is discrimination on its face. For instance, if a housing provider has a policy that they will not rent to domestic violence survivors, that is intentional discrimination. Desperate impact is a different form of discrimination, but that basically is a housing provider could have a policy that seems neutral on its face, but has a impact on the protected class in a overwhelming manner. And this is used by survivors of domestic violence. For instance, the housing provider has a zero tolerance for violence policy, meaning that if the police are called out for any violence in a household, the entire household will be evicted. Well, if you are the victim of domestic violence, statistics show that is overwhelmingly women are the victims of domestic violence. That policy is having a desperate impact on women more than men. So that has been used successfully to file fair housing cases for discrimination based on sex. The more common federal policy that's used to protect survivors of domestic violence is the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA. This was a landmark piece of legislation that was sought to improve criminal justice, community-based responses to domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking in the United States. How VAWA is used in housing, first thing that has to be understood is that it only applies to federally backed housing, and it protects victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking in housing, but it has to be one of these types of housing. Public housing, Section 8, project-based housing, Section 811 housing for the disabled, rural development multifamily housing, Section 8 housing choice vouchers, Section 202 housing vouchers for the elderly, Section 236 multifamily rental housing, low-income housing tax credits. It does not cover private housing that does not receive federal rental assistance. A lot of people are not sure if their housing is covered by any type of federal backing. So if you can do some research on the internet, or you can simply call Community Legal Services, and our attorneys can assist you in trying to determine if your housing has any type of federal backing. How does VAWA help you in your housing? If you're applying for housing, you can't be denied just because you are a victim. You can't be evicted or lose your federal rental assistance just because violence has been committed against you. And acts of violence against you are not considered to be serious or repeated violations of your lease or good cause for evicting you or ending your federal housing assistance. So what does that mean? The most common scenario is you're a victim and you have to call 911 because of the attacker. And a lot of times landlords, they see the police show up at the apartment, so everybody's going to get evicted. We have a zero tolerance. No, you are protected as a victim under VAWA if you live in one of the federal housing projects. They can't evict you because of that. What happens if the abuser is living with you? Well, if your abuser is living with you and uses violence against you, the housing authority or your landlord may evict the abuser alone and let you, your family, or other household members stay in the home. So there may be a lease violation because of the violence, but if it was due to domestic violence and it was basically a one-way street, you can have the abuser evicted and you can save your housing. If the federal housing assistance was based solely on the abuser, so let's say the abuser is the one that had the voucher, then you and your remaining family members or tenants had the right to prove eligibility for the housing. If you or another household member cannot show eligibility, you must be given a reasonable time to prove that you qualify for another federal housing program or to find new housing. If you have a Section 8 voucher, VAWA states that the housing authority may permit you to move and keep your voucher. even if your lease is not ended. Why this is important is most rental contracts have a penalty if you end your lease early, and it can be either a set fee or you may have to pay the remainder of what's left on your lease term. VAWA protects you if you have a Section 8 voucher, allowing you to break that lease without penalty and move to another unit that makes you safe. What if a landlord or housing provider wants proof of the domestic violence? If you are requested to provide the proof of domestic violence, these are usually the most acceptable forms. One will be a self-certification form, and this form will ask you for your name, the name of the abuser if known and safe to provide, the abuser's relationship to you, the date, time, and place of the violence, and description of the violence. To get this form, housing authorities will have them usually in their office, or you can call Community Legal Services or another legal aid office to get that. The other can be to provide a signed letter by a service provider, a shelter provider, attorney, medical, or mental health professional who has helped you with the abuse. This is called third-party documentation. You would also have to sign that letter. And probably the most common one would be provide a police report or court record, especially if you've gotten an injunction against violence against your abuser. A lot of people are concerned that once they don't want to disclose their status as a victim of domestic violence, in fear that that information will be shared with other people that perhaps you don't want to know that you are a survivor. The housing provider is not to share that information except in limited cases. And the most common are the housing authority needs this information to evict an abuser from the housing, or there may be some type of disclosure required by law. Housing actions to take if you are a victim of domestic violence. The most important thing, and I'm sure you'll hear this from all the presenters, is to secure yourself and your family. Report the abuse and seek assistance. Make sure you know what rights you have. Discrimination against domestic violence survivors in their housing can be a barrier to victims' ability to make the necessary transition from victim to survivor. What to do if you're a victim to secure your housing? As I said, if you're in a federally backed multi-unit housing, request a transfer to another building or unit. A lot of times, housing providers have multiple projects or communities, and you can even ask to be transferred to an entire different apartment community. If you have a voucher, you can request to port your voucher to another housing authority. So if you want to move from, let's say, Orlando to Kissimmee, you can port your voucher from the Orlando Housing Authority to the Osceola Housing Authority. You could even port your voucher out of state, but you have to be proactive and you have to take the steps to port that voucher. And the housing authorities will work with you to explain the process of doing that and what forms you have to fill out. And make sure that you request continuing assistance from the housing authority if you are getting a voucher. These are just some of the key points I'd like for everyone to remember, that victims of domestic violence may not be evicted solely because they are the victim. A victim of domestic violence cannot be denied admission or housing assistance from a federal public housing authority program based solely on their status as a victim. And VAWA creates an exception to the application of the one strike policy. A public housing authority may not use an incident of actual or threatened domestic violence as the only justification for terminating the victim's public housing assistance or Section 8 voucher. And just so you know, Community Legal Services provides legal assistance to customers in Orange County that need our assistance. Ms. Serena Pines is going to be speaking later, who heads up our family unit, and she will explain to you the services, the free services that we can offer to victims of domestic violence. This is our contact number, 1-800-405-1417. And if you need assistance, please contact us, or you can go to our website and you can do an online intake there.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for the information in regards to the legal services available at Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida. Up next, we have our Orange County Sheriff's Office, Corporal Jillian Beary from the Domestic Crimes Unit. Corporal Beary has been with the Orange County Sheriff's Hello, everyone. I hope you all can hear me now. Up next, we have Corporal Jillian Beary with Orange County Sheriff's Office. Corporal Beary has been with the Orange County Sheriff's Office for 9 years. She was a patrol deputy for approximately 5 years until she became a detective in the Night Investigations Unit and Homicide Unit prior to promotion. Corporal Beary currently supervises the Domestic Crimes Unit, which investigates all domestic violence, child abuse, and missing persons. She has a bachelor's degree in psychology and Spanish from Beary College and grew up in Central Florida. Welcome, Corporal Beary. If you can turn on your video and say hi to everyone, and the presentation is all yours. Thank you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well today. My information is kind of going to give you guys a brief overview of how law enforcement responds, and then we'll kind of go into what all services the Sheriff's Office works with and all that. I know Ms. Alexander kind of went over the definitions, but this is actually the state statutes. So that's what law enforcement has to follow when they're responding to any type of domestic violence incidents. So obviously they're family or household members. So domestic violence for us could be a spouse, could be a family member, or even somebody that you live with that is not just a roommate. It's anybody that you would consider, oh, this is my family. Obviously, there are all types of different crimes, and those are all encompassed within the last state statute to include any types of assaults, any types of batteries, shootings, stabbings, things like that are all within that, as well as stalking. That's a big issue we've seen all the way up unto unfortunately death, which is what our hope is in preventing and teaching about all the different types. So a quick overview. This is actually a lot of what we train our new deputies on. The deputies are going to be dispatched by the dispatcher because somebody has called in a allegation of a crime. So they're dispatched to where they need to go. They meet with the victim and witnesses and sometimes the abuser, and they kind of evaluate what type of crime so that they can conduct their initial investigation. A lot of times the deputies have been trained that we work directly with Harbor House, so they will offer the victim or the survivor the availability of Harbor House. We can even transport them there if they need it, especially if it's one of those immediate things. They need to get out, they need to get safe. That's what we're going to do. We'll bring them to where they need to go. A lot of times the deputies will also explain the injunction process, which is a amazing tool for survivors to keep themselves safe. And clearly, if a patrol deputy needs a detective, depending on the severity of the crime, one of my detectives or myself and my sergeant will respond. If the abuser is there or we are able to locate that person, they will be arrested and then booked into the jail. So the jail process is a little quick, fast overview. They don't get a bond if it's domestic violence. It doesn't matter if whatever time they're booked in, they will have to see a judge before they are released. The majority of the judges will grant what's called a no contact order as part of their pretrial release. So if you see a judge and they do agree to give you a bond or some way to get out, you will sign paperwork that says you will not have contact with the victim. The arrestee also must notify law enforcement prior to returning to the residence. So say they wanted to go back and get some belongings, they have to call deputies to make sure that the deputies go there with them so that they're not violating their protection order, and then they can retrieve their belongings. It's actually called a standby. It's a fairly common thing, and we teach our new deputies about it. Every class has been explained the process and to keep any future violence from occurring. As I said, there's the process is called Injunctions. So this is actually a restraining order for anybody that didn't grow up in Florida. And that is, I'll just go quick, a domestic or dating violence injunction may both direct the respondent to do a specific act and prohibit him or her from doing other acts. The respondent is the person who the injunction is served against. It will state on its face that an injunction issued in the state of Florida is enforceable in every county in the state, and any and all law enforcement officers must use their arrest powers to enforce it. That means that if a state of Florida issues an injunction, any law enforcement officer in the state of Florida can enforce that injunction. So the process it's changed a little. This is more of the pre-COVID. I'll kind of glance into the COVID-19 process. It's made a little bit, some of it's a little easier, some of it's a little bit more difficult. But the person seeking the protection order must file a sworn petition. They are then called the petitioner. So they're asking the court system to issue this injunction. The courts will schedule a hearing, but the person, that's to get a permanent injunction. If the petitioner is in immediate danger of domestic dating violence in the days or weeks leading up to the scheduled hearing, the court may issue a temporary injunction. So that is something that will be filed quickly and served on the person before the other hearing. Sometimes they can grant continuances if they cannot find the respondent or the abuser to serve that person. This is the breakdown of the items the state is looking for or the courts are looking for before they issue the injunction. So this is what a judge or a magistrate is going to review prior to saying yes or no to the injunction. So they want the petitioner's address, the respondent's address, the respondent's last known of place of employment, their description, any names that they're called, their relation to the petitioner, any type of violence, and all the facts about what have happened and why an injunction needs to be granted. Filing the injunction, this is actually, so this is the old process. They'll go to the courthouse and they will do all of this there. Right now, and I believe that Ms. Cooper will kind of go into the additional information about COVID-19 injunction processing. A lot of it can be done online. You can file the petition online. You can do a Zoom call. There's all sorts of different ways. That way we don't have to be exposed to anything. You don't necessarily have to go to the courthouse. So a little convenient, not as always effective in expressing what's going on. But the court, for the filing of the injunction, the court will approve or deny it. And once that is approved, the petitioner will be given 2 copies of the unserved injunctions. One's going to be for them, and then one's going to be for law enforcement to serve. It indicates the hearing date, time, and location. So for deputies to serve it, the injunction is provided to the deputy who's going to make contact with the respondent. Obviously, that's the person who we're serving it on. The deputy explains the term of the injunction and serves him or her with the paperwork. Both copies of the injunction are dated and notarized by the deputy indicating service. So each person will have a copy that says, hey, this date and this time it was served and the respondent is aware. And we let our warrants unit know. That way it can be entered into the statewide, nationwide system, actually. So the FCIC NCIC is the state and national communication information database that we put all that info in so that anybody that runs a person can see that injunction is active. And a copy of the served injunction provided to the petitioner and the respondent. The injunction, this is verbatim out of the state statute for the most part. This is what it prevents the person from doing. They cannot go back to the house. So insofar as if somebody was a victim, they immediately have the residence. So they don't have to go looking for new housing, which is very convenient with the way that the housing laws are. So they can maintain their residence. The person has to be at least 500 feet away from their house, school, employment, anything. They are prevented from any further acts of violence. and anything that would violate the injunction. They're not allowed to contact you by phone, message, any social media, no contact. And that includes third-party contact. So an abuser could not ask somebody to call the survivor for them. That would be a violation. They're also prevented from knowingly being within 100 feet of the person's vehicle or doing anything to their property. And they must surrender any firearms and or ammunition once they're served with the injunction. So in my unit, we actually work directly with the Harbor House. We have an in-house representative, and she is wonderful. If we have an issue that we call a survivor immediately and we say, hey, we think something may be going on, and she helps us set up any type of quick shelter, and then she will work with them directly. We have learned a lot through that agency and have been training our deputies on different information insofar as evictions for different people. Obviously, if somebody is a protected individual, we are going to make sure that our deputies are aware of that. And that way people aren't being put out on the streets, because that's not the point. We are here to protect them and keep them away from anybody that is going to hurt them. We also have a grant with the company Lyft. So we are able to call Lyft cars for survivors. We can do it so they can go to and from court, to and from doctor's appointments, to and from the sheriff's office, anything that's going to be related to their case. And we also have our own in-house victims advocates. They are very savvy on all of the different programs that victims of crimes can be entitled to. Sometimes, depending on the level of violence, their medical needs are covered, and they work with the families so that everyone is taken care of. So our office definitely has a lot of different entities to assist once a case has started. And if there's any questions, obviously I can read the chat. So thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Corporal Beary, for your presentation. Up next, we have Genevieve Cooper, representing Harbor House of Central Florida. She's going to be discussing a little bit about the services that are available at Harbor House. Genevieve Cooper is the Elderly Victim Engagement Manager for Harbor House of Central Florida. Ms. Cooper has over 7 years of domestic violence experience in managing judicial programs related to child welfare and law enforcement. Ms. Genevieve received her bachelor's degree at Rollins College and is currently working towards her master's in business administration at their Krumer Business School. The Orlando native has a passion for social justice and gender equity, while fostering a safer community for residents in Central Florida. Welcome, Genevieve. If you can turn your camera on, and I'm requesting all the other speakers to please mute themselves. Make sure that you're muted. Welcome, Genevieve. The presentation is all yours.
Hi, everybody. So I just wanted to start off and thank everybody for participating in this webinar on behalf of Harbor House and everyone co-facilitating this. We really appreciate you sharing your time with us today. So getting started with Harbor House, so we are the Certified Domestic Violence Agency for Orange County. And some of our core principles for the agency as a whole is going to be seen in these pillars illustrated below. So safety, justice, and healing. So going over that in some greater detail, you'll see on this slide here, we have a lot of different services to help with survivors. You'll see everything from our shelter to our 24-hour hotline. We also now have an additional resource for survivors looking to make contact with an advocate that they can text, in addition to reaching out to our social media platforms. As we've heard a lot today, COVID has really changed different mediums in which we're working with survivors, so we want to make sure that us as an agency are keeping up with those needs so survivors feel supported with whatever means of communication they want to reach out to us with. So in addition to our shelter, we have everything from childcare on property, kennel that's available for them to bring their fur babies, extended shelter, and transitional housing, which my good friend Carrie Arch will be going over later today. Our legal advocacy program that works with our injunction protection attorneys, our early victim engagement program, which I'll be going over soon after this slide, DV 101 support groups, prevention and education for our community and young people, and then economic justice, which Carrie will also go over later on today. So about the Early Victim Engagement Program, so this is going to be my team here. So the Early Victim Engagement Program is conducted of 7 different advocates between law enforcement and child welfare. And you can see here the different areas in which they're located. So the whole purpose of the Early Victim Engagement Program is the collaboration with different system partnerships. So law enforcement, child welfare, but also the state attorney's office, community legal, and many people that are on this webinar today are really important partners in the work that we do. But the idea is that through our collaborations with them, we're able to work directly with their teams, receive referrals quicker to help survivors that are at higher risk of homicides moving forward. It's no secret that Orange County has been impacted by domestic violence and an increase in domestic violence, but unfortunately an increase in domestic violence related homicides. So that is the exact purpose of these programs here, is to work with these different agencies to better recognize which survivors and families are at higher risk of that and prevent that moving forward. So so that might mean getting an injunction, and as Corporal Beary went over, that can be a really complicated process. And for all the survivors that are out there listening today, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. This is a lot of information for anybody to take in, much less a survivor that's going through crisis and trauma, especially those that are impacted by the pandemic as it continues to impact everyone in the community. I don't expect you, and I don't think anyone on this call expects you to memorize all this information. Please reach out to us with whatever way you feel more comfortable doing so to get this information and have those in person or over the phone text conversations with an advocate so we can go over different resources with you, because as we all know, domestic violence looks different for everybody. The abuse that they're going through is going to look different for every survivor, and we want to make sure that we're definitely sensitive to those needs and we can address what is safe for you and your family moving forward. And that's the whole purpose of not only the EVE program, but all of our programs here at Harbor House. So here is a really overwhelming chart, and I wanted to make a point to show this and share all this with you because this is exactly what survivors go through when various different systems connect with them, whether that's with law enforcement, whether that's with Department of Children and Family, the state attorney's office, working in the injunction process or family courts. There's lots of different stakeholders that do make contact, and usually in conjunction with one another. And coming from the perspective of your own agency, it might just seem very simple, like, oh, like you can go and do this or get an injunction or just reach out to the domestic violence agency. But when a person is going through crisis and trauma, as you can see here illustrated in this picture, it's super overwhelming. So we want to make sure that we're, again, very sensitive and understanding of all these different barriers and complications that a person or a family might be going through when they are impacted by domestic violence. So something that we hear a lot at our agency, and I'm sure many people in the community have questions about, is why does a survivor stay? And these are even more complicated now in relation to the pandemic. So you can see here from everything from where will I live, and as all of the different presenters have said today, housing is a very important thing for anyone, but most likely for survivors of well impacted by violence. Will my abuser gain custody of the children? I have no one to turn to. How can I afford to leave? This pandemic has exacerbated many barriers for survivors, including employment, housing, food security, and just finances in general. If you can't afford to leave, then leaving really doesn't seem like an option, right? So these are all things that survivors are often considering in conjunction with the violence happening. And we want to make sure that our programs, our advocates, and our agency as a whole are very aware of that when we're talking with survivors and going over options and resources for them. And as we talked about earlier, and as the Domestic Violence Commission talks about, is that unfortunately there is a very real reality that this does lead to homicide. So we have to be very aware of that when we're going over resources, and always remembering that the survivor is the best expert of their life and what is safe for them in that moment. And so this is really important to remember as this empowering-based ideology when we're working with our community partners like law enforcement, DCS, state attorney's office. And through this understanding of empowerment base, we're all able to work together to really help these survivors make very key, safe decisions for themselves moving forward. So for our program, the early victim engagement, some different ways that we work with housing is, as Corporal Beary has talked about, is whether it be when there's an arrest that's happened, and then there's a no contact order put in place, whether it be through civil injunctions, temporary or permanent. Judges are often making decisions about housing, and then even relocation assistance, and these things listed below: evictions, family courts, DCF, and dependency. There's very many different avenues in which we work with survivors that touch their housing situations. And like I've said before, and I will say it 1,000 times, everyone's situation is different. So I want to sit here and say that there's a blanket explanation or solution for everyone's problem. But through our really amazing collaborations with these stakeholders that you see on this call in the Domestic Violence Commission, we're able to take these relationships with them and address the individual circumstances of every survivor, because these are just a few examples of how domestic violence does impact their housing situation. And with that, I'm going to give it over to my good friend, Carrie Arch.
Hi, everyone. Again, I want to just reiterate with what Genevieve said, and we thank you guys for joining us today. I am the Social Services Manager here at Harbor House, and I just wanted to go over some economic justice programming that we do here within shelter and in our outreach services. Okay, so just to start, obviously some financial facts, and obviously the pandemic is hindering us even more in these areas, but 58% of Americans have less than $1,000 in savings. So like Genevieve said, a lot of people in domestic violence situations are looking for a way out, but in these tough times, it's very difficult for even them to think about how to leave, when to leave, and even having any money. And many people right now are not working, or if they are, their hours have been cut. So economic instability is a very big issue at this point. 78% of US workers are living paycheck to paycheck. The average American rent is $1,307, which is way too much with what Americans bring in on average. Not to mention that Orlando was named worst city in the nation last year for affordable housing. And again, with recent pandemic, we have seen an increase in the housing instability within Orange and surrounding counties. That is one of the biggest things on hotline calls. People calling right now, wondering where they're going to live, their lease is running out, not enough money to pay for the rent, so on and so forth. All right, so what is financial abuse? Like Lisa had earlier, she had the regular power and control wheel. Here you have the economic abuse wheel, which has, I'm just going to go over the main topics: employment and workplace, finances and credit, child support, welfare, housing, childcare, education and training, and legal issues. What we see here at Harbor House when advocates, whether they're inside the shelter or out in our outreach programs, when they deal with people coming in with financial abuse, an abuser can indicate in any of these sections and target them, whether it be employment, child support, keeping them from working, isolating them, so on and so forth. The Economic Justice Program here at Harbor House, again, is within the shelter and our outreach programs. What we do is financial safety planning. We provide and facilitate financial literacy lessons using Moving Ahead Through Financial Management curriculum by Allstate, which you can get on the Allstate website, and other educational programming. We are very big into assisting survivors with finding employment, helping survivors find safe and affordable housing by utilizing our community partners, assisting survivors with furthering their education, and supporting survivors in rebuilding credit scores damaged as a result of financial abuse. We have small independent loans that we can use. We also work with numerous community banks to help assist survivors. We also provide referrals to many community partners, such as Catholic Charities, Rapid Rehousing, so on and so forth. A couple of programs we use here after people get out of shelter, depending on how well they do. We have an extended stay shelter program that is post-crisis housing designed for survivors to further their independence. The average stay for this is 6 to 12 months. We can help up to 7 families, and this program includes intensive financial health and life skills training. Survivors that are participating must be referred internally to this program. Survivors must be working full-time or attending school and working part-time. And this program allows survivors to set and accomplish specific financial goals and obtain housing within the community. The next program we have is a transitional housing program. This is a program that is in collaboration between ourselves, Help Now, which is the Osceola DD organization, and Career Source. Again, this program is an internal referral only. It's scattered off-site locations, and survivors, again, must be post-crisis and have income stability. This program can help up to 9 families, and it can assist for rentals in Orange, Osceola, and Seminole counties. Assistance is provided on a sliding scale that decreases over a 24-month period, and it allows survivors the ability to develop independence and financial stability with assistance from Harbor House. So as you can see, during this pandemic, and even outside of it, we do have programs to assist people with financial security, housing, furthering their education, and just becoming more sustainable by themselves. But again, in this pandemic, that's even more important. If you guys ever have any questions or need any other information or have referrals to our programs, you can either reach out to myself or Kenyatta Willis, who's the Economic Justice Housing Coordinator. And we thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Carrie and Genevieve Cooper, for sharing with us a little bit about the Harbor House services and the impact that you're all having in the domestic violence community here in Central Florida. With us today, we also have another attorney from Community Legal Services. She's going to touch a little bit about the services provided for survivors. Serena Pines is the manager of the Family Law Unit at Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida. She oversees all of the attorneys in the family unit. She will share with you the services that Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida can provide to victims of domestic violence. Welcome, Ms. Serena. I know we don't have your slides up as Jeff covered some of the information earlier, but we can all hear you. And maybe if you want to turn on your camera and wave at us.
Well, I thought I had it on. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. Welcome.
Oh, hi. I'm not sure about getting the camera going. I apologize. I'll try one more button. Oh, here we go. Can you see me? Hi. All right, I'll turn myself off. Yeah, as you mentioned, I manage the Family Law Unit. We have 11 attorneys in our unit, and the focus of the Family Law Unit is domestic violence work. As everyone is aware, Community Legal Service provides assistance to individuals in the community that need legal assistance, and we do provide assistance to individuals that are not experiencing domestic violence when they need help with family law. But the unit focus is domestic violence related work, and so through that focus, we receive referrals from community partners, domestic violence shelters, law enforcement, sheriff's department, police departments. Some areas we receive referrals from health departments, and really any other community partner that would like to send us a referral. We have a specific referral email set up for that purpose, but survivors can also contact the helpline. They can also go online. We have a very extensive website that we've developed. There's a chat feature there. Person can initiate an intake that way. And also we have a lot of information, general information on the website about family law related issues and domestic violence related issues. When we receive a referral, our legal assistants conduct an intake. They reach out to the survivor. So really all we need is a name and a phone number to initiate that process. And from there, if we don't have a legal conflict, the case is assigned to a unit member. And the variety of cases that we handle are injunction cases, domestic, dating, stalking. Sometimes we do some repeat violence cases. So we handle injunction cases. The level of service we provide may be anything from brief service all the way up to full representation. We're also able to provide individuals assistance with matters such as divorce cases and paternity cases. Again, we're looking for facts that include domestic violence. As you all know, an injunction will enable an individual to stop experiencing violence, but that relief might be temporary. So the injunction may be time limited, but they still have unresolved issues. The injunction may give them some temporary child support or alimony, but they need a long-term solution. And so through our funding, we're able to represent individuals who've experienced domestic violence and get them through a divorce and get them to a position of long-term safety and stabilization, get them the sort of support that they need. So again, we're doing that through divorce cases, paternity cases. We do some modifications of those types of cases. So perhaps an individual has been divorced or they've received a time-sharing plan, what we call a parenting plan, through a paternity case, and maybe initially violence hasn't been a big issue, and maybe violence develops later. A person could go back in and modify their case, and that is something that our attorneys can handle as well. We also assist individuals maybe who are seeking to have the abuser held in contempt. Maybe they're not following the mandates set forth in the injunction. So, we may go back into court on that type of particular issue. We have 11 attorneys, and we are practicing in 4 different circuits, and we have 8 different offices that house our family law attorneys. And again, we can be contacted through direct community partner referral, through our website, through chat, and through the helpline. That's all I have. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Serena Pines, for all the information. You all provide a lot of services to GV survivors, and we're very grateful for the work that all of our partners are doing in the community, specifically during these hard moments. I also want to introduce our co-chair for the Orange County Domestic Violence Commission, Mr. Dick Batchelor. We had some technical issues earlier, and he wasn't able to come on as a first speaker. Mr. Batchelor is a former member of the Florida House of Representatives, and he's also the CEO of Dick Batchelor's Management Group and a fierce advocate for domestic violence survivors in the community. Mr. Batchelor, welcome. I'm not sure if you have the video camera feature. You can say hi and just give a couple of words of encouragement to everyone.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, well, thank you. And you can't see me, which is a blessing for you. I apologize for fortunately, I know a lot more about domestic violence than I do IT. So I wanted to just say 2 or 3 very quick things. Thank you for putting this together. It was a tremendous presentation. I was able to listen to the full presentations. And as co-chair of the Domestic Violence Commission, along with Judge Alice Blackwell, I learned a lot of things today, frankly, that I should have known maybe as a co-chairman, but did not know. But in fact, what I think I would like to do is, as the Domestic Violence Commission moves under the direction of Mayor Demings to come up with a work product, I would like to be sure that we have circulated to the commission members what was presented today in summary. And also, I'm going to offer to reach out to some of the participants today to do an edit of our draft recommendations. So as we make our draft recommendations, it's obvious hearing the presentation today, there are a lot of people on this call today that could bring a perspective and an edit perspective to our final product. So I've learned a lot today. Thank you for the participation. Thank you, County, for facilitating this. And I'll look forward to, again, taking advantage of the information you've shared with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Batchelor. It was an honor to have you here with us and have the support of the whole entire commission. Some of you in the chat featured have been asking us if we're going to have this presentation available. And yes, this presentation is currently being recorded. Community Legal Services is going to have it available in their YouTube channel. We will send it out to all of the participants. Orange County is also going to have this accessible on our website, and all of our partners as well will have this training available for their survivors and community partners. As of right now, this wraps up our presentation. Once again, my name is Jitsenia Negron, and I'm very grateful to have you all here. This current image has the number of community legal services. If you know of anyone that's in need of legal services within housing or domestic violence, please feel free to refer them to Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida. The hotline number is 1-800-405-1417. Take a screenshot of this because you will be needing it, unfortunately, in the upcoming future. And please remember that we're here to support you, and I wish you all a beautiful day. Thank you.
Thank you.